Welcome back, and we're right back to you. We're very delighted to still have with us our dear guest, Dr. Mohamed Al Halwagi, is former director of the Egyptian Museum in Tahrir Square. And we were talking about the everyday excavations and different dynasties that are revealed to the whole world, in addition to the civilizations also, which is fascinating. It's unbelievable. We're floating over history. I mean, Egypt is floating over history. Some countries are floating over oil, but even we are floating over much more precious elements, which is history. We were talking about different civilizations that are discovered that would reflect different times, like royalty, like other dynasties. We need you to elaborate over that particular thing. You were talking about Luxor and Aswan, and whoever would have the chance and luck to visit Luxor and Aswan would know what am I talking about. And we were talking also about Giza and Dahshur and all those places. How different is this place from the other? In what sense?
It depends on the era and the aspects of each era. As we mentioned before, like if we go to Minya, for example, in Tal al-Amarna, during the time of Akhenaten, he believed in realism. He asked the artists and sculptors to show the reality to the Egyptians. That's why we can see statues of Akhenaten are odd, like he's a little bit fat, he's suffering of some disease, and you see his elongated head and thin neck, protruding lips, and his protruding belly. This shows or realize or resembling the realism, the concept which he believed in. This only the case during the New Kingdom in 18th dynasty in Tal al-Amarna in Armenia.
It signified what?
The principle which he believed in realism and reality, that normally kings are ideal. You see the king in strong, athletic body with muscles, but never the kings never shows themselves weak or suffering of disease or something. And even Akhenaten shows people his personal life with his family and his kids, his daughters, playing with them, and with his wife Nefertiti, which is completely exception in royal art in ancient Egypt. Normally kings are exposing themselves, attacking and fighting enemies, killing animals, building religious building, and so on, but never shows their private life to the whole people. That's why, as you mentioned, from place to another is completely different. The aspects and essence of the art and civilization is different from place to another. Armenia is different. If you go to El Fayoum, there is a different type where the kings of the Middle Kingdom build their pyramids, and high officials build their tombs. The type of architecture and art during the Middle Kingdom, showing kings the reality, because they were working hard to establish the Middle Kingdom after Egypt was passing by the first intermediate period after the end of the Old Kingdom. So Egypt was at that time was passing of a weakness time. So the kings of the Middle Kingdom was working hard to regain the unity of Egypt and to keep Egypt strong as it was during the Old Kingdom. So the kings show themselves are suffering of tiredness, and they are looking very old, which is completely different than New Kingdom and Old Kingdom. So, as you mentioned, each area has its own aspects, and each time has its own aspects as well.
Right. 98 years, commemorating 98 years over the discovery, that marked the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb. That's a huge event. Tutankhamun's tomb in its own right it makes history
Right.
alone.
Exactly.
So if you like to elaborate over that particular very, very precious piece of treasure, huge piece of treasure that Egypt owns.
Tomb of Tutankhamun is the only intact royal tomb discovered in Egypt up till now. Discovered in 4th of November in 1922 by British archaeologist Howard Carter.
Even Howard Carter became famous because of Tutankhamun.
Of course.
Became Howard Carter because of Tutankhamun.
Howard Carter was lucky. He was an inspector of West Bank of Thebes, of Luxor. And in 1910, he was riding his horse, and his horse crumbled, and he fell down on a pit, and he found himself inside a room, a burial chamber, and he found a statue for King Muntahotep Nebhebtra II, the founder of the Middle Kingdom and 11th dynasty. So,
Was it that close? He just stumbled and he fell into the tomb?
yes, yes. So he was lucky.
Not any other Egyptian could have stumbled the same way?
No, he was an
That's pure
inspector.
luck.
He was the inspector of the area, and he used to inspect the area, riding his horse every day. So he was lucky at that time, but the discovery itself did not take enough propaganda until 1922. Again, with accident, he was able to discover this tomb. How? He was digging in the Valley of Kings in west of Thebes, and during his work, during the working time, the worker, they take some break. And young boys, they carry jars, pottery jars, full with water to give to the worker. One of these boys left his jar on the floor, a dusty floor, and after some time, the water coming from the jar revealed a limestone break. So the boy removed these dusts, and then he called Carter. So Carter came and cleaned this block of limestone, and he found that this is not only a block, it's a step. And he started to clean, and he found another step. Then he found about 6 steps, And then he cleaned and removed the dust, and he found a corridor. This corridor led to the gate of the tomb of Tutankhamun. So immediately at once he sent to Lord Carnarvon, who was financing his excavating, to tell him that he discovered a great discovery, a wonderful discovery, and he didn't enter this tomb until Carnarvon came to Egypt to to see the new discovery, which at that time was the iconic discovery. From that time up till now, the discovery of the royal tomb of King Tutankhamun. The tomb of Tutankhamun is the smallest tomb in the valley of royal tombs in the west bank of Thebes. It was the smallest one, but it was the only intact tomb. We find the royal tombs huge, but we discover them empty because they were robbed in different times, from ancient time to modern time, by different people.
You cannot specify whom what were they robbed by.
No, even from ancient time and modern time.
But was that tomb, I mean, was it that close to the layer of, or was it so deep?
This is a good question. What makes this tomb, what keeps this tomb intact until 1922?
Must have been very deep.
I tell you what, King Ramses V, when he built his tomb, they used to cut their tomb from the rock in the mountain in the west bank of Thebes. So the worker of Ramses II, when they cut the tomb, they left the remains of the broken stone. By accident, they leave it on top of the tomb of Tutankhamun. If you visited the Valley of Kings, you see that there are layer, the mountain is like
steps.
So Tutankhamun was in the under step of Ramses V. So the tomb of Tutankhamun was completely hidden by the rocks of Ramses V. Thanks God, because this saves the tomb of Tutankhamun, and it makes it the only royal tomb discovered all over the history of Egypt from the early beginning until most recent time. So Carter started to open the tomb with Carnarvon.
What did they find inside?
They found the tomb itself is starting with a chamber, was called the antechamber. They found the beds used for funeral reasons, and the chariots of King Tutankhamun. They were in a part of this chamber, and they found other items like two statues for King Tutankhamun. They were standing in a front of another tomb, which is a burial chamber. So they were guarding the burial chamber. And these two statues are made of gilded wood, and the face and the body is painted in black. This is significance of reincarnation and the soil of Egypt and resurrection. So the soil is referring to resurrection. Then they start to open the burial chamber, and they found 4 chariots, chapels. In each chapel there is another chapel until they reached sarcophagus, quartzite sarcophagus. Inside this sarcophagus they found a gold gilded wood coffin inlaid with some semi-precious stones, until they found the internal coffin of the king, which is made of pure gold, weighs about 110 kilograms of pure
And
gold.
inside the body, the mummified body.
Inside this coffin, the most inner coffin, they found the mummy of Tutankhamun.
Intact.
Intact.
Not touched.
Unfortunately, Carter and his assistant, the mummy was stuck to the gold coffin. So they wanted to take out the mummy, so they started to heat the gold coffin. That's why the mummy was affected harmfully and hardly from this heating. That's why they were not able to bring this mummy to Cairo, because most of this collection brought to Cairo in 1924 to Cairo Museum, Egyptian Museum, Cairo, except the mummy, because it was not in a good condition of preservation. And I would like to mention that this is the only tomb discovered, and the Egyptian government at that time insisted that no division, that the whole collection will stay in Egypt. As you know, there was a rule of division, that each foreign expedition discover some artifacts. They, by the law, they can take some part of this discovery and to be displayed on their countries, but fortunately the government, Egyptian government, insisted not to divide this collection and to keep this collection, most wonderful collection in Egypt up till now.
Up till now. Unfortunately, we have to stop at a very, very crucial point where I could feel most of the viewers are staying in anticipation to hear the rest of the story. And so it's me also at the same time. On a promise that you could come another time and we could continue the story.
It's my pleasure.
It's very interesting, Tutankhamun.
Yes, very.
Thank you so much, Mr. Dr. Mohamed Al Halwagi. You are a professor of history and also a former director of the Egyptian Museum, Tahrir Square. Thank you so much for the beautiful story. And I guess this brings us to the end of this edition of Windows on Current Affairs. Many thanks to all of you. Till we see you again next week. Let's say goodbye.